Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. Welcome to Budmouse. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting history. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Wayback Wednesday. This is a special Wednesday because today is my in-laws' anniversary. We haven't gotten them on tape yet, although technically we did take Carol for a trip. Hopefully, eventually we can get them to agree to appear. But for now, there are two pictures of this lovely couple. They've been married for 55 years. They are the main reason that Joe and I chose Friday the 13th for our own wedding anniversary. So hopefully you'll enjoy this and find it entertaining, or at least something to inspire to. Before that, we have a race. Today we're going to do elves again. You ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friend. Let's see who it is today. Oh, I forgot to. Okay, there we go. Now we got some elves lined up. We'll get started. Maybe. Oh, for Pete's sakes. There we go. I started it and then I paused it. There we go. Okay. I see Stole. I see Heather. I see Freckled. I see Stace. I see Misha. I see My Crafty. I see Spirit. We got Good Cemeteries. Clashes. There's Southern. There's Jackie. There's Wright. Let's see. There's Mountain Man. There's Really Haunted. Hippie. Ocean. Who else? We got Pete. Spirit is currently in the lead. There's Neil. Old Fart. AAP. Trending. Spirit's still in the lead. There's Sarah and Hiking. Oh, Sarah might be taking the lead. Oh my goodness. Oh, we got people coming from the back. Oh, looks like Jackie's coming from the back. Alright, hang on. Alright, Jackie's channel is called On the Road Again. Maybe if I had the two dots it would have pulled up, but it did not pull up. This one says, we are Jackie and Jared. Come join us as we travel different places. We're going to popular places as well as hidden gems. We go on road trips to the beach, mountains, and in between, and historical places. We love their historical places as the best. And you can see here some of their trips. So, if you're interested in that, they're near Pasadena, I can tell you that much. So check them out, like, share, comment, and have a good day. Alright, Mr. Bud, you gonna tell us a story?
I'll tell you a story.
It's a good story?
It's an interesting story. It doesn't involve the Beverly Hillbillies or anything.
Oh, man.
I know. Well, couldn't quite
Get my hopes up.
Couldn't quite get the, Jed to rhyme with anything in the Bud family, but, Anyway, today's history topic is kind of a local spiel, if you will. But it does take place, given that they got married 55 years ago. Yes, we're actually talking about my mom and dad. Now, my dad was born in 1946, year after World War II. Had two brothers. Uncle Danny's still with us. Uncle Larry is no longer. Uncle Larry was the one that was in the Navy, served on the USS Shangri-La. And a lot of the times when we take and go over to his house as kids, we get to take and look at his old books on the aircraft carrier when they would do operations of restocking and have other boats come along and offer aid and supply. Also would have a lot of fun reading through a section of books on Wonderful World of Disney growing up. A lot of fun over there. But my dad, as the family, started out young, they lived in a little tiny town on the railroad called Bonesteel. And it's way over in the... It's kind of funny because it's not technically eastern South Dakota. It's still on the western side of the river, but it's way down by the Nebraska state line. But it's where the railroad came up out of Nebraska from Norfolk, hooked up and went all the way over by the town of Wood. Someday we'll actually get down there so we can see what some of those town sites look like.
Hopefully.
Closest we've gotten so far was all the way to Winter. Winter, chicken dinner. But my dad, as things would go on, they moved a lot. They would move to places like Rapid City. They would move back down to Bonesteel. They would go back up to Rapid. They'd go over to all the way out to Seattle, down to Arizona, back up to Rapid. The primary reason behind all this moving around was my grandmother, Edith, was never really happy in a single place for very long. She had a time clock on her that would be between 6 months and 2 years. And then all of a sudden she was no longer happy in one location. And it was less the fact that she just didn't like where they were living as much as she just didn't want to be in the same place. One of the things that I remember them talking about was that when she was a lot younger with my grandpa Earl, is that they used to live out in a place called White Owl. Little tiny town, still in existence.
We've been there a couple times.
Yeah, some of the kinfolk are still out there, actually. And they live in White Owl and Red Owl and Enning and, in that neighborhood. Pretty easy neighborhood because those, like 3 towns in a row that are still in existence, including Union Center. Where if we ever were really desperate, we could always stop and get gas, or if the shop is open, use the restrooms and grab a snack. But as things went along, my dad started to learn about automobiles, working on engines and stuff like that. And he also wound up striking a deal, if you will, with my grandpa. Because, see, the way my grandmother would work is she would get in touch with one of the boys and would always say, "It's your fault we didn't move." And then once he got that kid to admit that he wanted to move too, then it just became a game of numbers. Then she would go talk to Earl and say, "We got to move because I'm not happy here. The kids aren't happy here. We got to move." Well, finally, my dad and Earl had gotten to a point saying that we need to do something to change this up. And what was one of the other keys that really kind of said it was that they wound up moving down to Arizona, and my dad's grades from the high school up here in Rapid didn't go down. And so he wound up having to sit a year and work in a garage instead of going to school, which kind of bummed him out. By the time they, had left Arizona and moved back to Rapid, he finally got his grades to catch up, but he was 1 year behind everybody else. This was also about the same time that my dad started experimenting with cars. He had one that was just an absolute blast. He had it was a Studebaker Golden Hawk. And if I remember right, I think he said that it was a 55 or 53. Had a supercharger engine under the hood. Beautiful car. Fun car. The only problem that he had with it is that the cops started making a habit of following him everywhere. And one of his favorite stories that he used to tell us when we were kids is that down there in Arizona, he was just flying along on the highways, and he came over the top of a hill, and down there at the bottom of the hill was an officer. And he's like, well, I already know I'm dead, so I'll just, go down to the regular speed limit, and went right past the cop, and the cop pulled out and followed him and pulled him over. And he says, I knew you were speeding. He goes, really? He says, yeah. I didn't even need the gun. You know how I could tell you were speeding? He says, no. When you came over that hill, all 4 of your tires were off the pavement.
Oops.
So here's what's going to happen. Okay. I'm going to let you off with a warning, but you're going to have friends all the way to the state line. And sure enough, he let my dad go. He followed him to the next county and pulled off, and another officer pulled behind him and followed him a little further. It really frustrated my dad, though, because less than 10 miles from the county line, from the state line, there was this diner, and there were all these hot rods there sitting in the parking lot, and my dad couldn't play. It's like they knew where he was and where he was going, and he wasn't going to be able to go and play with them. Darn. But as it was, the Studebaker made it back up here to Rapid, and the story would continue. Now, my mom, on the other hand, she came from a family who spent a lot of time in Denver, spent a lot of time in Crawford, up in Chadron, Scottsbluff. They panhandle in Nebraska, basically. My grandpa, on my mom's side of the line, he was primarily employed doing things like painting houses, and then different, faculty needs during the summer. He would go out and help cut hay, stuff like that. And then depending on where the business was, they would move. Sometimes they lived with a couple of friends of the family, Aunt Effie and Uncle Dick, in Crawford. And then, as the seasons would change, they would move down to Denver. Well, it worked out pretty good for a number of years. My mom would go to grade school there in Crawford. There was a little town that they lived in further south, but interestingly enough, they lived in an apartment that was close to a station that sold gasoline. And the county that they were in was never a very big county. They spent a lot of their time moving back up to the north and then back down south as needed. But as things would happen, when my mom wound up, you might say that my grandma and grandpa, when they split, my mom was kind of caught in between the two sides, because
been there, done that.
Yeah, my dad, I should say my grandpa on my mom's side, of course, went off and lived with the other family, but the four kids, weren't allowed to go with them. They were pretty much stuck with my grandma, who was an interesting lady, if that's a good way to put it.
That's a good way to put it.
They moved back to Denver, and my mom went to a school up there called the Abraham Lincoln High School. As things would go, it was an interesting situation, because my grandmother seemed to think that my mom was going to stay with her for her entire life. They would sew fabric, learn lessons on needlepoint, general stuff. The one thing I did not care much for my grandmother is the fact that she smoked like a chimney, which is kind of a cruel way to put it, but it was pretty much the truth. Huh?
I had one of those too.
Yeah. And given the fact that I had asthma, it made it really hard to, stand to be around the lady. My aunt, my grandma Edith had the same problem. They both like to smoke. And I'm like, gee, I don't have much lungs. Thank you for sharing. But as things would happen, my mom did graduate from high school, and she was planning on taking an going to Black Hills State University. In fact, she took some classes there. She was going to learn about stenography. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically the ability to take notes really fast, dictation type things. Sometimes they use a keyboard, sometimes they use a pencil, depending on how fast you are. But anyway, what would wind up happening is that my mom took a chance. She moved up to Rapid and was living with my Aunt Ruth at the time. And it was kind of an interesting event. My dad was going to what was the Free Methodist Church. Church is still in existence. It's changed names since then. Now it's called the Freedom Church. But what would wind up happening is that they would meet during a hayride one fall. And it was kind of funny because my dad would tell this story is they all got into the back of this wagon and my mom was just literally swamped in blankets to try to stay warm. And, you know, they would get to talk a little bit. And my dad, you know, seemed to enjoy meeting her. And so they, you know, would try to hook up a little bit later. The interesting part of the whole thing, after a couple of months of courting, as you will, they wound up going to the Free Methodist Church to get married. And the pastor said, well, I hope you guys aren't superstitious. And my dad said, why? He says, well, this is Friday the 13th. Oh, we didn't know this. And of course, it was also kind of funny because Aunt Ruth, who my mom was staying with, didn't realize that she had stepped out to go get married.
Oops.
She thought she was doing daycare. And one of the kids she was watching was there at the church when they got married.
I mean, so technically she was doing daycare.
Technically still doing daycare, yeah.
Kind of.
Kind of. But, you know, as things, you know, happened, they got married in 1968. And my dad had to do a couple odd things before he started with the cement plant. He worked as a meter reader, interestingly enough, going, you know, through backyards, trying to check the ratings on people's houses. They lived, interestingly enough, they lived in a place off of Silver Street for a number of years. And then after the flood, they had to find a new place because the homeowners said, well, our family's coming and they need a place to stay, so you guys are going to have to find another place. Thanks, you know. But then in 1971, my brother was born. And then 2 years later, I showed up in the world. I think it was 6 months after I was born, we moved into the house that they presently still live in up on Haynes. And it's kind of a unique house because there's just so many memories that are built into this place. The other thing that we get to kind of chuckle at is that this will be their 55th year together. You always read about, you know, the breakups in Hollywood and stuff, and it's like, I think my mom and dad, I think they would just go ahead and be retired as the bellwether for this group. But they are still happy, still live together. My dad still has absolutely no hearing thanks to working at the cement plant. My mom, interestingly enough, she used to do daycare, and at one time she would try to keep track of anywhere from 11 to 14 kids at one time. I don't know how she did it. Mothers are built with eyes on the back of their head. That might be part of it. Even to this day, she'll run into kids that, you know, she might have watched back in the 1990s, and here they are with kids of their own. And they're like, are you sure you don't want to do daycare? No, she's pretty much good. She just recently had to have hand surgery because of some arthritis in a couple of her knuckles. And she also had to have knee surgery. And so she's a little slower, but still pretty spry for a grandma. And of course, they have Niles to help them get around a little bit, and Lucy, the resident cat. But you know, for mom and dad, 55 years, congratulations, and see if we can do some dinner tomorrow.
I hadn't thought about that.
This has been the Bud Files. Joe, you folks have a good evening out there.
Ooh, yeah.